Want to get into the lesson. Hope you're with me. Hope you have your outline, or most importantly, your Bibles, because textual study is what's done usually before the sermon, but it's going to be a large part of the sermon today. When considering who Jesus is, our faith is the focus of today. We need to look at the question, who is Jesus? Let's look at the evidence and let the signs point us where we need to be. We need to examine the miracles. And I know the assembly we're talking to, we likely all of us here already believe, but you never know. And there is an apologetic approach I'll put some themes to, but all of us worshiping God already, I want to mention that it is so important for everyone to look at the signs. That's where they validate the authority and identity of Jesus. And that is exactly why people then and now are very quick to discredit the signs and discredit the eyewitness testimonies and then just reject the implications of the signs. But for you and I to be a sincere seeker of truth and academic honesty to the text and to history, you and I have to look at those signs and plan our lives accordingly. That's why John also wrote his gospel account, so that he says those miracles are signs. He used that word for signs. And there are other words for sign. There are other words for miracles. I provided them for you on the back of your handout, and I'll get to them in a moment. But I first want to share this definition by Westminster Diction. This is a wording, and then, of course, it's also blended with Webster, underlined. The idea is that a miracle is an extraordinary event manifesting divine intervention in human affairs. So yes, a miracle is an occurrence within nature or contrary to nature that would not have happened otherwise without divine intervention, God's power. So that's a miracle. Something happened that wouldn't have happened if God had not gotten involved, of course, after the creation of the natural order of things. Scripture records a variety of miracles, and here are three purposes for miracles. Number one, many of them were simply to help. To help. And sometimes the purposes overlap, of course. But Jesus and the prophets and the apostles, they did not come close to healing all the sick of their day or feeding all of the hungry of their day. You think about the fact that must have not been their primary mission, or else it would have occurred, and that would have been temporary anyway. Jesus, the Messiah, had a purpose, had a mission to be heaven's atoning sacrifice for humanity to be saved, making it possible to save humankind. That's kind of more important than where's my next meal going to come from. Because if I physically die right now, I can have everything I need on Jesus. I can live forever on Jesus. So keep that in mind. But there were times they were moved with compassion to perform miracles because Jesus cares. Like in Luke chapter 8, I saw a picture of this just yesterday. The idea of Jesus walking along with Jairus and going to heal his daughter. And then while walking in the crowd, there was a woman who was hemorrhaging and just touched the hem of his garment. And no one saw it. It was one of those personal things, but Jesus made it public for her benefit as well, to restore her and say to her, your faith has made you whole, and therefore expressing compassion to her. There's also another purpose for miracles, to authenticate, like back in 1 Kings 18, when Elijah had that contest with the prophets of Baal. God performed this miracle on the hill through Elijah to validate him as a true prophet and all of those other prophets for what they were, false prophets following a false God. And when Jesus came claiming to be the Messiah, I mean, come on, that's a pretty bold claim. How would he expect anyone to believe that unless he was able to perform miracles to prove it, to validate it? And Peter reminds the crowd in Acts chapter 2, verse 22, that those signs and wonders and the things that have recently been happening, they have been happening to authenticate, and they were done because Jesus is the Lord, Son of God. And then, of course, he emphasizes the key miracle of the resurrection itself. And that's, of course, next week. But I referenced C.S. Lewis, properly spelt on the screen. If you ended up with a typo print, my bad on that. But here's what C.S. Lewis said. All of the essentials, I think, of Hinduism would remain unimpaired if you subtracted the miraculous. The same is almost true of Mohammedanism, as he says. But you cannot do that with Christianity. It is precisely the story of the great miracle. It's what it is. A naturalistic Christianity where you take out the miraculous but try to leave the doctrine. He says it leaves out all that is specifically Christian. That's how highly he esteemed it, and we should as well. And that's exactly what liberal critics, however, strive to do. They strive to discredit the Bible, take out all of the miraculous because they know the implications of the signs. They will hold to excuses no matter the faulty reasoning behind them because they know the signs point to where God rules. And that's a place they don't want to be, and that's a place that God will honor, by the way, eternally if they do not repent. I remember walking through some common area in a business. I don't remember the location. That's ironic. But I do remember that there was a TV show that was being seen from one of the channels, and it caught my eye because it sounded like they were speaking positively about the Bible. Like, we know these events were of the Bible. Okay, so that seems like they're speaking of it authentically, like they respect the Scriptures. Well, not necessarily. I sat down, started taking notes because it became obvious that their slant, their intent of this particular program was to say these people thought these events happened, but now with what we know, here's how they really happened. So we know what we're in for there, right? They don't believe the credibility of Scriptures. They claimed, for example, that the flaming bush, I say the flaming bush because we often say burning bush. The miracle was that it was on fire for a while and it didn't burn, it wasn't consumed. So I like to say flaming bush. But they said it was actually, let's see if I pronounce this correctly, Dictominus albus. I don't know if I said that correctly, but it's this idea that there's a plant that naturally produces some flammable chemicals that when lit, like if it catches a spark, it evaporates quickly. So yeah, that's what Moses saw. Okay. But that doesn't fit the script. Last time I read the text, that conversation with God lasted quite a while, more than a half a second. So I'll buy the Bible's account in this. Obviously, they're trying to change the script. And then, of course, the Red Sea waters. The Red Sea waters. They said, oh, they didn't part for the Israelites. They just kind of receded a little while, and then they traveled farther north to cross over some marshland. And I'm thinking, first of all, that's not what the text says, so that's not academic honesty, and it kind of would give the Egyptians the advantage, and they would pick them off from the behind one by one. So that doesn't fit. They also would say that Jericho's city walls were just a convenient earthquake, right down to the second after doing, quote, what God said for them to do. Yeah, I'll give them that. That would have been very convenient, because if they had not obeyed, God would have not done what he did to bless their unprecedented victory. Concerning the miracles of Jesus when they got to there, just the kind of stuff that folklore is built on. And this is an example from somewhere else, but I'll pull it in since it applies. Some people say things like, it wasn't Jesus who multiplied a small boy's meager lunch to feed 5,000 people. No, but seeing his willingness to offer what little he had pricked their consciences and eradicated their selfishness, at least for the moment, and brought out the food they already had. And lo and behold, everyone had enough. That's not the script. No. We need to be fair to the text and true to the eyewitness testimonies, the best attested work of antiquity. Don't allow those who don't believe to crack the foundations of your faith. Our very hope of salvation is in the power and the promises of Jesus. If he is who he says he is, and he validated himself to be, then he is our assurance. So miracles are to authenticate. And the Bible is, as I mentioned, the best attested work of antiquity. Let's give attention to these eyewitness testimonies. There is another purpose for miracles, though, and that is to, let's see, the particular screen is no longer activated. Thank you for that. To persuade. To persuade. Exodus 7, 14 and 44, or 14 following, I should say. When Moses stood before Pharaoh and the miracles of the 10 plagues started coming around, they were to persuade, probably the whole nation, say, hey, look at me, I'm God, but to persuade Pharaoh to let his people go. So those were some purposes: helping, authentication, and persuasion. John lists that word, though. John lists that word, and I clicked again. It's not working for me. Simeon for sign. Simeon for sign. John recorded the miracles of Jesus because Jesus did them for that reason. What's the meaning of that word? Well, Scripture used some other words. Let's put the rest of them on there. The words for sign, or the words for miracles, dunamis, represents a mighty work showing power, great exhibition of power that only God would have. Ergon, if you know English, you know some Greek. Ergon, referencing work or a deed that makes one's word true. Like, I did this, that validates what I said. Teros, wonder, something to marvel at, that amazes or mystifies. A miracle does all of these things. But John specifically uses this word Simeon for sign because it references an attestation or an affirming act. And if you're with me in John chapter 20, let's go to John 20, verses 30 and 31. And truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And this is the purpose, clearly stated and seen in the raising of his good friend Lazarus. Thanks for the tech help. Appreciate that. Lazarus was risen or raised that they may believe. That's specifically stated as the reason. I want you to turn or tap with me to John chapter 11. I want to set and summarize the scene here. And this is where the textual study comes in for the lesson, the bulk of our lesson time as well. Back in, if you read one chapter, you keep wanting to go back. If you see the word therefore, you want to see what it's there for and keep going backwards. John chapter 10, verse 30. Let's go back to John chapter 10, verse 30. When Jesus said, I and my Father are one. Now we know that, we believe that, we see that, we rejoice over that fact. But not everyone was. The setting is in Judea. And you're here close to Bethany, right there smack down in. And he's not winning the Man of the Year award here, because to say that I and my Father are one doesn't say I believe in Jesus, I believe in God, Jehovah, and following him. No, he's making himself clear that he is God in flesh. And verse 31, then the Jews took up stones again to stone him. Have you ever had anyone honestly wanting to kill you? Verse 32. Jesus answered them, many good works I've shown you from my Father. For which good works do you stone me? Which of these do you stone me for? And the Jews answered and said, for a good work we do not stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God. In other words, they're not reading the signs. Verses 34 through 38, he gives a sound defense. This isn't the focus of my lesson, so I'm just summarizing. I love Jesus' response to the Pharisees so many times. That's one of my favorite portions of the Gospels. And he gives them a sound defense that they have no response to. Look at verse 39. Therefore, they sought again to seize him. They're rejecting reason, aren't they? But he escaped out of their hand. Because it's not Jesus' time to die yet. Not this way. Nope, not now, not this way. Verse 40, and he went away again beyond the Jordan to the place where John was baptizing at first, and there he stayed. Then many came to him and said, John performed no sign, but all the things John spoke about this man were true. Convincing signs. Verse 42, and many believed in him there. So this is how it should be back in Judea and Bethany. This is going well right here. Pleasant circumstances. He's teaching. People are listening and believing and worshiping. This is great. Now John chapter 11, verse 1. Now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha. Now we know where we are. We know the context now. This is where we are in the story. This is what's going to happen. We know it well. But there's a problem that's often maybe not emphasized. His body is back in, well, at this time his sick body is back in Bethany where the Jews were trying to kill him. Verses 2 and 3 emphasizes. And then verse 4. When Jesus heard that he is sick. Now Jesus knows a lot, like everything going on, okay? He said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Have you ever been in a situation where people thought you were missing something, but you were actually 2 steps ahead? Well, we've all been in situations like that. Think of how Jesus was fully aware of the entire situation that he wasn't even present for, and these people he's around, the referencing of him being sick and asleep, they're misunderstanding at first, and even in the moment. Look at verse 5. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. That's amazing, the tension he must have felt and realized, no, I'm being patient right now. I mourn that they're mourning, but there's a reason. Now, contextually, we might know more. There's also circumstances taking place. But look at verse 7. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. I don't know, in this moment, it's like maybe a test. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, I don't know what version you're looking at. The Jews of late sought to stone thee. Hither thou goest again, which means, Master, are you crazy? They were trying to kill you before, and now you want to go back? Verse 9. Jesus' responses sometimes make you say, why did he say that? But then when I understand why, it's like, oh, that's an interesting way of wording. He says, are there not 12 hours in a day? If anyone walks in a day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of the world, or this world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. What does he mean? They were concerned that his life was in jeopardy. So don't go back there. This is part of the plan. And the Lord's making it this way. Jesus would be saying, this is my time to work. Daylight. This is the word picture. This is my time to work, and I'm doing my Father's will. I see the light. I am the light of this world. So if I'm doing the Father's will, I'm not going to stumble. It's going to be okay. I get it. Interesting conversations. Jesus knows what he's doing, and by the way, as a side note, if we're following the Lord's will, we won't stumble either. Look at verse 11. These things he said, and after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I might wake him up. Then his disciple says, Lord, if he's asleep, then he will get well. However, Jesus spoke of his death. They're writing about this later. He spoke of his death, but they thought he was speaking about just taking rest and sleep. Not this time. Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. He told them. And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. Then Thomas, who is called Didymus, or the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Does that sound like a statement someone we falsely label as doubting Thomas would say? I esteem Thomas for wanting to see the evidence and being the bold one to say it up front, because everyone else wanted to do that too. They wanted to see the evidence, and I would have probably been right there with him on that. Prove it to me. Well, he is saying here, let's go die with the Lord. Excellent line. Good job, Thomas. Verse 17. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother, mourning with them. Then Martha, in verse 20, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, like on the outskirts of town. And Mary was sitting in the house. We grieve in different ways, perhaps at times. Then Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. I would have loved to have known the tone in which she said that. Maybe accusatory, mourning, sad, angry, maybe all the above. But now, even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give it to you. A little suggestive, perhaps. Verse 23, Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Your brother will rise again. For now, let's skip to verse 32. Then, when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. They had the same conversation, same thoughts. Therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews that came with her weeping, all of these circumstances that have no place in heaven, and just what was in their hearts and thinking, and he groaned in his spirit and was troubled. Look at verse 34. He said, and I would love to know the tone in which he said this, where have you laid him? Where have you laid him? Where have you laid him? I don't know the tone. But they said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. God in flesh weeps. And of course, it's often emphasized Jesus cares. Obviously, he cares. He's a high priest who understands. Look at verse 36. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. There's a lot more in his soul causing him to weep. Have you ever, by the way, cried because you're mad? Have you ever been so mad that you cry? Frustrating. Love the people who just don't get it. And said to them, could not this man, they're speaking of him and God's, with all the Spirit's help and Jesus, God in flesh, he sees people's hearts and he's thinking this. Jesus knows they're thinking this. I want to make sure I read it just right. Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind also have kept this man from dying? I do want to share this thought. Didn't type it out. Careful about those unfiltered thoughts when I'm studying, trying to process something. This is a dangerous, accusatory perspective cast in a condemning way towards the Lord of life. He could have kept this man from dying. It's kind of true, but it's also very dangerous. Notice verse 38. Then Jesus, again groaning in himself with good reason, came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone lay against it. Jesus says, take away that stone. I don't know the tone. Take that stone away. Take that stone away. Not sure. But it confined the dead, and it has no place. Martha and the sister of him who was dead, Lazarus, said to him, Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? Oh, let's come back to that verse in a minute too. These are the verses I'm skipping, we're using as conclusions, obviously. Verse 41. Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying, and Jesus lifted his eyes and said towards the heaven, Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I know that you always hear me, but because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. Verse 43. Now when he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. You've heard the joke. It's a humor statement, well placed sometimes, that if Jesus had not specified which corpse, they all would have come. Don't you like that? That's power. Lazarus, come forth. Verse 44. And he who had died came out bound hand and foot with grave clothes. This man was prepared for death because he was dead, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, loose him, let him go. Now, picture yourself there. There's a chosen scene where you can imagine yourself there with the others in this scene. But how would you have felt seeing this? I have lists in my office that I don't get. They're serious lists. It's good to have, but not also good. Keep track of weddings. Keep track of funerals. It's good advice. Many years ago, someone told me to make a list. Make a list and keep note of every funeral. Over the past, I don't know, however many years, I've done 71 funerals. I was looking just yesterday. I said, wow, looking at names, remembering people. I have never done a funeral for someone who I later saw in town that week or month. Ever. Now, I have had a few experiences of very, stunned for the moment doppelganger lookalikes. And that's scary. I'll never forget, I was at a Pizza Hut. I had just finished eating the first half of my personal pan pizza. I'm glad I was sitting down and had energy from the pizza to not faint right there. But I was looking at this guy that walked in and said, oh, I haven't seen him since I did his funeral. And I mean, for minutes, I was staring at this guy who looked very similar. It wasn't. The closer I got, of course, but I was curious if he was his twin or something. I didn't know it. So, good conversation, but that was something else. And yet, it wasn't him, because everyone knows something about this condition called death. It's like final, mortality, finality. And that's the mindset they had here. If he had been here, if Jesus had been here, he could have stopped this event. Do they know who they're talking to? Back to the text, verse 45. Then many of the Jews who had come to Mary and had seen the things Jesus did believed in him. But some of them went away to the Pharisees. Oh no, not them again. And people told them the things that Jesus did. And the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, what shall we do? For this man works signs that you're not reading. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him. Well, why aren't you? And the Romans will come and take away both our place and the nation. Oh, that's why. And one of them, Caiaphas, being a high priest that year, regardless of his motives, he said the truth. You know nothing at all. Verse 50. Nor do you consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and not that the whole nation should perish. Now this he did not say of his own authority, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. To what degree of his understanding? I don't know. That's a good study. And not for the nation only, but also that he would gather together in one the children of God who were scattered abroad. What insight. And heaven sees all. Verse 53. Then from that day on, they plotted to put him to death. So like a domino effect. One event leads to the other, and Jesus knew all of this, leading to the glory of God in many ways. Therefore, Jesus no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there into the country near the wilderness to a city called Ephraim, and there remained with his disciples. God's timing is perfect. Look at verse 55. And the Passover of the Jews was near. We know Jesus is our Passover. This is kind of overlapping time and happening at the same time. It's beautiful. And many went from the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves, many out of a good heart, some not. But then they sought Jesus and spoke among themselves as they stood in the temple. What do you think? That he will not come to the feast? Is he going to show up? Surely. But, okay, here's what. The chief priests and the Pharisees had given a command that if anyone knew where he was, he should report it, that they might seize him. we're into chapter 12. I'll summarize verses 1 through 8. You've got 6 days before the Passover. Jesus returns to Bethany, eats with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Mary anoints Jesus' feet. Lots of important events. Verse 9. Now a great many of the Jews knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but they might also see Lazarus. Well, if I had heard that someone who I knew was dead, maybe attended his funeral, was alive again, I'd want to see that too. Whom he had raised from the dead. Verse 10. But the chief priests plotted to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him many of the Jews went away and believed in Jesus. Lazarus is a living sign. A living sign. A sign that others opposing to Jesus don't want to read. Jesus is stealing their power. Verse 12. The next day, a great multitude that had come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him and cried out, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel. I bet the chief priests loved hearing that. Sarcastically speaking. Then Jesus, when he had found a young donkey, sat on it, as it is written, Fear not, daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming, sitting on the donkey's colt. His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified. Interesting as to when that glorification took place, but I'm not going to rule out he's always glorified, but key events, keep that in mind. Then they remembered that these things were written about him, and that when they had done these things to him. Therefore, the people who were with him when they called Lazarus from the tomb and raised him from the dead, the people bore witness. They reflected and they realized. For this reason the people also met, because they heard that he had done this sign. That's the type of fun textual reading that is best to do before the sermon and graft it in occasionally. But after all that good study, here's the summary. John 11. Jesus got word from Mary and Martha that their brother and his good friend Lazarus was critically ill. Yet Jesus stayed where he was for 2 more days. The hostile setting gives us a little bit of insight, but Jesus is Lord. He knows all. He eventually made his way back to Bethany, where they lived, but now Lazarus had been dead for 4 days. Can you imagine what Mary and Martha must have been thinking? Where is Jesus? He can heal this man. Have you ever thought that God is late because he's not doing your will? As hard as it must have been for them to wait, and for Jesus to let them wait, Jesus showed them something he couldn't have shown them any other way. I suppose Jesus could have come into town 6 days earlier and healed a sick man. But when Jesus did come, he came into town and he healed a dead man, calling out Lazarus with a message and a meaning they would never forget. Lazarus was a living sign of Christ's power over death, because he's God in flesh. If you read the text and the narrative again, and you know that's what Jesus is thinking, and that's what everyone around him is not getting, you can see that a lot more. This was a miracle that his enemies could not deny. May I have the next slide advance? This was a miracle that his enemies could not deny. They see Lazarus living and attending his funeral, but some people will not read a sign, no matter how important or clear it is. Thank you. This is a quote that I read from a guy. I don't want to pronounce his name, don't want to mess that up, but it applies here. There are 2 ways to be deceived. One, to believe something not true. And in our 2 Peter class on Wednesdays, we're dealing with that. Don't know the truth. Don't listen to the false teachers. The other is simply to refuse to believe what is true. And that's what we see here in the text. Some people are rejecting Jesus not because they lack the proof, but because they love control more than truth. Keyword, selfishness over righteousness. Whatever that rejection is. They couldn't deny the works, and so they want to refuse the evidence and their implication and just bury the evidence again. These are people who want to destroy the evidence of the living, raised Lazarus and also Jesus. Put him to death too. Little would they realize just how significant his death would be in the script that God wrote before the earth was created. Soon after raising Lazarus, Jesus foretells his own death and, of course, his own resurrection. Easter Sunday is next Sunday. Shane has that sermon time, and I'll abbreviate this portion of your outline as my conclusion today. Lazarus was raised that they may believe. Jesus was risen that we may be saved. John 11, verse 24. We're going back to that verse now. This is my favorite. I told a few other people yesterday, I said, all of this lesson builds up to this right here. I'm looking forward to sharing this line. This is my favorite quote of the lesson, of the narrative. Martha said to him, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last days. Good for her for knowing and believing that. Good. But the frustration that Jesus was feeling, his love towards her, I don't know the tone in which he said this. I want to feel like he said this in a whispering, consolatory tone. Like I'm going to reveal a secret for you. Let me tell you. Let me remind you of something. I am the resurrection. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? She said, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who has come into this world. John documents the miracles of Jesus and the key miracle, so that we will also be convinced that Jesus is the Lord of life, who gives life, new life, even now. 1 Corinthians 15:20, but now let's think about the future. Christ is risen from the dead and has become the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. It's no problem at all for Jesus to resurrect our dead bodies when he returns. Think again of Jesus' answer, though. I am the resurrection. He doesn't say it's an event that he will be at. It's not an event that he will cause or start. Jesus is about to demonstrate to them that he is the resurrection. Think on that the rest of this week and the rest of your life. John 10:10, I've come to give you life and that you may have life more abundantly. If you follow Jesus, you will have life. That's now. Spiritual abundant living. How can I come to him? Well, let's reference there Romans chapter 6, verse 4 through 6. This is typically shown as an invitation slide, but notice, therefore we were buried with him through baptism into death, that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, even so we also should walk in newness of life. For if we have been united together in the likeness of his death, certainly we also shall be in the likeness of his resurrection. I thought about extending the invitation. We're doing a lot of things differently today. Might as well be different for this too. If I don't have something to my specifications that by a deadline, I'll usually hold back because I like things to be like I want them to be. And I was working up an article for the bulletin today. I went a different direction and I had a little bit more time. So this on the screen is the article I would have put with just a little bit more time. That ministry gets in the way of my ministry. I often say that. But do we hear Jesus calling? Do we hear Jesus calling? I want to read this for you by way of invitation. Lazarus heard the voice of Jesus and walked out of death into life. And what did Jesus say next? Loose him and let him go. In other words, don't leave him living. Don't leave a living man wrapped in clothes of the grave. Those garments belong to who he was, not who he is. And that same call reaches us. Paul says in Colossians 3:8, put off all these. If you've been raised with Christ, you don't keep wearing what belonged to your old life. The new man doesn't dress like the old one. When God makes you alive, it ought to show. So imagine Lazarus refusing to take off the grave clothes. He's alive, but still dressed for death? It wouldn't make any sense, and it doesn't make sense to us either. God has given you something to wear, something better to wear. Colossians 3:12. He says to clothe yourself, in this context, with compassion and kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, and of course, love, the fruit of the Spirit. That's the wardrobe of someone who's been made new. That's what life looks like now. So here's the question. Do you look alive? Or are you still carrying around pieces of the old man? Are you saying one thing while your life still smells like the tomb? Well, if you've been holding on to what should have been buried, it's time to let go, to loose yourself of those grave clothes, step into what God has made you to be. You are not who you were. You are not bound anymore. Through Christ, you are alive, so live like it. Amen. And we don't have to go across town. We can just go across the building. I hope you appreciate the meal that's been prepared and the spiritual specialty that you just received. Dwell on it. Be blessed by it. Are you subject to the Lord's invitation to put him on in baptism? Let's make it happen as we stand and as we sing.